welcome to today's Cyber Threat Report. Today is August 18th, 2011, and joining us today we have John Hogoboom. John's a recognized security expert and analyst and also helps with some of our tool development. Welcome, John. And what do you plan to talk about today?
Today I have an article that came out about a week or two ago about Microsoft's BlueHat prize, which is a security challenge, and we'll talk about what they're doing in that space.
Great, thanks. We also have Jim Clausing. Jim is a key member of our malware analysis team. Welcome, Jim. And what do you plan to discuss?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the recent develops in the mobility space and a new article I saw today about malware in network devices. We've talked some about that in the past, so we'll talk about it a little more.
Okay, great. Thanks. We also have Dave Gross here. Dave Gross is a senior incident response analyst. He's also a lead for our malware analysis activities. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you.
And I'm Brian Rexroad, and I try to provide a little bit of the glue between the things that we see in the threat environment and trying to bring those to the services that we provide to customers. So if you have feedback, questions, or recommendations on things that we should discuss, you can reach us with email at cyberthreat@list.att.com. There should be a link from the web page from the tech channel as well to reach that email list. So let's go ahead and move ahead. John, what's Microsoft doing here?
Okay, yeah, so Microsoft, well, you're probably familiar with a lot of other companies like Google, Mozilla. There's a lot of vendors out there who have what they call bug bounty programs, where if you report a bug to them, they will give you some kind of monetary cash reward for that. Usually it's not a lot of money, maybe a couple $1,000 or something. Well, I guess it's not a huge amount of money, but it's enough to warrant encouraging people to do so. Usually it's white hats that do that kind of activity. Anybody who is a black hat that finds a bug and they're only going to get about $3,000 for turning it into the vendor, they can probably make more money selling it on the black market or using it in part of their criminal enterprise. But in any event, here's what Microsoft's doing. They've been very resistant to any kind of bug bounty program, but what they announced about a week or so ago, maybe I think it was at Black Hat that they kind of officially announced this program. It's called Microsoft's BlueHat Prize. It's going to run from now until April 1st of 2012. And what it is instead of a bug bounty program, what they want to do is encourage security researchers to give them proposals or ideas that will solve an entire class of security problems, not just little individual ones that you might find in like Word or Excel, but one a type of security research activity that's going to maybe solve all of a class of exploited vulnerability sets that they might have in their product line. So first prize is $200,000. Second prize is $50,000. And it'll be interesting to see what people come out with. It's an interesting idea. I don't know how well it's going to come off, but we'll see what happens.
So something more along the lines of, the address space layout randomization kind of a thing is what they're looking for.
Right. Something that's a little bit more revolutionary than just finding a bug and patching that in wherever it is, but something that's going to kind of revolutionize the way that security defense is done in a Windows computing environment.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I think, this is just a sort of a personal observation, no statistical study around this, but it seems like the trend lately has been a lot more toward what we're calling fuzzing. I think, this notion of being able to generate a lot of random input and see how, programs or applications or systems react to that. And, and sometimes they crash, and sometimes you get lucky and find out that there's, maybe through some subsequent analysis, that there's a bug that's in there that you can sort of exploit. But ultimately, what you'd like to be able to do is shut down that capability to do any type of fuzzing like that. So It sounds like a really a good idea. Let's see, like you said, let's see how it goes. Hopefully somebody will come up with some good ideas. I think it's an attempt at least to put the motivation in the right place as opposed to find little problems. Let's see if we can find big fixes. All right, thanks, John. So let's go on to Jim. I guess there are some new threats associated with Android that we have to talk about. Is that right?
Yeah. There are a couple of things. There were a couple of new Android malware families that have been pointed out this week. There's Droid Kung Fu 3, which is a variation on the Droid Kung Fu family that was originally discovered back in June. I think we talked about it briefly on here before. The biggest thing is that the authors have updated it to obfuscate the command and control URLs. They were in plain text in the previous version. And they've encrypted the exploit binaries that are embedded in the apps. We've talked about some of those before. The rage against I don't remember the name of the exploits, but so that they can hide from antivirus if the users have antivirus on their mobile device. And again, like all the other ones, it seems to send the IMEI and the OS version and the model. In the case of the Droid Kung Fu 3, it still is using exploits that are primarily viable against version 2.2 and earlier of the Android OS, which is still a sizable chunk of the market. About 75% of the Android devices out there fall into that. The other one that just became aware of today is a new malware called Ginger Master. This is the first one that uses the Gingerbreak exploit that was discovered in April. The Gingerbread is the code name for Android 2.3, and this was the first exploit that was known to work against the 2.3 devices. And the slide that I got up there just to show the number of devices and the OS revs on the various devices. I got this from the developer.android.com. It's the Android developers forum. And they got these numbers by looking at who was connecting to the Android marketplace over the previous 14 days. And you can see the Gingerbread, the 2.3 was first started really hitting the devices in April. There were earlier versions of it on very few devices prior to that. But you can see the 2.3.3, which is the latest update, is slowly growing its share of the Android market out there. And so this latest one, this Ginger Master, that's able to exploit 2.3.3 and below. It also works on 2.2, at least some 2.2 devices. So that's a big chunk of the Android devices that are out there that would potentially be vulnerable to this. Again, these both the Droid Kung Fu 3 and the Ginger Master have primarily been found in alternate markets, Trojan applications in alternate markets. But as we've seen, it's a matter of time until one sneaks in, albeit for a short period of time, into the legitimate Android marketplace. So, anyway, since we've been talking recently about a lot of the Android malware, and it seems like every week we have some new examples of it, I figured we ought to look at what the new ones are in this past week.
Now, these again are embedded in various applications.
Yeah, the Droid Kung Fu 3 was found in 38 applications in an alternate market. I believe it was another Chinese language market, which is where a lot of these have shown up originally in the past. Ginger Master, I don't remember how many applications that's been embedded in so far, but that's a relatively new one that is just appearing in the wild in the last few days.
All right, good.
One of the other interesting things, interesting developments in the mobility space, there was a report this last week at a conference by some researchers from UC Davis that was actually kind of disturbing. It was some software that was able to do essentially key logging by making use of the accelerometers built into the new smartphones to detect the vibrations when users were touching the screen to type in various things. And in the first trial that these guys at UC Davis did, they have a prototype of some software that was about 72% accurate in actually detecting what was being pressed on the screen. So mapping a key press in a certain location to a particular letter or number. In this case, they were doing it on a phone and just with a number pad, but 72% is kind of scary because they'll only get better at it, and that's still close enough to eliminate a lot of guesswork and narrow it in so that if you are going to be guessing based on this, you can do a much better job of it. Until now, in most of these smart devices, any application was free to access the accelerometers because the developers, the designers weren't aware of any particular interesting information that you could get from that. But now it looks like potential key logging, maybe it's now time to start worrying about that. In the applications need special permissions to read the location from the GPS, for example, but they don't need any special permissions to access the accelerometer.
Well, it sounds like now, has there been a commitment to make that permission at this point, or is that just conjecture at this point?
Yeah, that's just conjecture. It's something that we need to give some thought to. On the other hand, games, all of the games that you see on, the examples on TV where people are holding up their phones and turning stuff like that require, real-time access to the accelerometers. So, whether the developers will be eager to limit the access to that, I kind of doubt.
I guess in the meantime, there are a couple of things that you could do. One is just follow good rules in terms of what applications that you install on your device. We discussed that, I think, 2 episodes ago. Another aspect would be perhaps to find some funky way to type in characters on your on your device that would kind of foil the accelerometers, perhaps, and maybe lifting the device up to your finger would foil it, for example.
I don't know. It's kind of scary. There's a lot more stuff that you can figure out than what we were aware of before. So it's actually some pretty interesting research.
Yeah, absolutely. And, in a broader sense, I think this is kind of indicative of the kinds of things that are new about mobility that I think a lot of security researchers or even users in particular are probably less aware of or would not have thought of yet. The different applications for an accelerometer, I think, are still there still is a lot of opportunities for the kinds of things that you can do with that. And this is just one more example where it's inventing new ways to use those tools.
Yeah, one of the things that the PhD student said was their current prototype was done on the phone size form factor. He expects it to be a lot more accurate on the tablet size form factor with a QWERTY keyboard on the screen. Mm-hmm. He expects to be able to do much better than the 72% on that.
That's interesting. And, that's sort of another aspect of this. I think they use some specific devices in doing this, but this probably would apply to just about any device with a touch screen. Is that correct?
Yep. Any of the modern smart, phones or they all have the accelerometers in them. They may have slightly different ways of accessing the data, but they all have them.
Yeah. Now, I didn't read the article myself in detail. So, did they happen to try anything with the hard keyboards associated with them?
I don't recall them saying anything about using the hard keyboards. For that kind of stuff, I think you're still susceptible to a lot of the older sorts of key logging.
Mm-hmm. Well, I was wondering, for example, each key would probably have some little bit of a twang associated with it that might show up in the accelerometer as well. So, that's quite possible. But I don't recall them saying anything about that in the paper.
Yeah, I'm wondering, they must have to know what's displayed on the screen in order to be able to know what's getting pushed. Is that something that they can readily get, or was that part of the experiment? And I guess if you use the standard keyboard, I guess they would know the relative position of those keys.
Right. In the prototype that they built, they controlled what was popping up on the screen. They controlled the placement of the keys. But yeah, you'd expect most of the time it'll be the standard positioning, so they can make a pretty good guess based on that.
Right. I was just wondering if there was some way for them to actually see what was on the screen and be able to discern from that what's being touched, and maybe not go even for the keys, but even on a graphical image or something, some image, if you're touching certain parts of the image, they may be able to discern that as well.
Yeah, they didn't say anything about that in here, but I imagine there are some other researchers out there looking at stuff like that, too.
Yep.
Well, it's actually, to sort of just close this out, Dave, I think you have a good observation there in the sense that I suspect that they cannot see what's on the screen. They were probably making some assumptions about what is there. If you were doing something like a security authentication, it probably would make sense to scramble the numbers around on there or scramble the letters around. You can't type it quite as fast, but certainly it would be a way to sort of foil that sort of technology.
Yep, especially if you change them each time.
Yep, absolutely. So, very good. What else do you have, Jim?
Well, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was what Brian Krebs has called juice jacking. And this came up at DEF CON last week in Vegas, where the guy who developed the Wall of Sheep, which is where they post private stuff that's been sent in the clear over the Wi-Fi network. Anyway, he put up this cell phone charging kiosk just stuck it out there to see whether it would get any use. And during the 3.5 days of DEF CON, 360 people apparently used it to charge up their cell phones. And the one graphic here I really like: you should not trust public kiosks with your smartphone. These two pictures here at the bottom, the one on the left is the cables that were hanging out that people could use to plug in to charge their phone if they, if the battery was running low and they didn't have their charger with them. But what was on the inside was a computer. And the image on the right here, it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but there's a disk drive there where they chose to be kind about it, but they could have copied all of the data off of most of these smartphones onto the disk. It's something that a lot of people don't think about, but when you're running low, if you're at the airport or a hotel or something and they've got one of these available, you need to think long and hard before you plug into it, because most of the phones these days, as soon as you connect it via USB to a computer, they set themselves in a mode where the computer can read it as if it was a disk drive.
I was going to say, Jim, you shouldn't have to think very long about this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I agree. I wouldn't.
Yeah, so this is actually very interesting, because he's basically turning upside down that scenario where you throw some USB devices in the parking lot that have been infected, and then the notion is that somebody picks it up, inserts it into a device in their controlled environment, and then they're infected, and it becomes a Trojan to be able to get into an enterprise, for example. A classic example that's been discussed in the context of some of these APT threats.
Yeah, so, one of the things that Brian Krebs, who was the first one to break this, mentioned was the case where people, their cell phones are running low on battery. They happen to have a USB cable, but they don't have their charger, and so they go plug into some place that's got a USB port to try to charge it up. And like you said, it's really scary for those of us who worry about these kinds of things for a living. But, I'm not sure that my wife or my mother wouldn't go ahead and plug in. Just one of the things that they did discover is that in most cases, though, if you actually power the phone off before you plug it in, it doesn't power it on, so it isn't readable in that case. The other thing, just from my point of view, is make sure you get extra adapters. Something like this little device here, I keep in my bag. It plugs into a wall outlet and it has a USB socket, so the USB cable that I normally charge my phone with, I plug it in there. That's how I charge it most of the time. But I keep one of these in my bag, when I travel. So hopefully I'll always have an adapter with me.
Right. 10 years ago, the cable that you plugged into your phone only provided power. And I think there's a lot of people who are not particularly savvy enough to know that, especially like the little mini USB ones that they have, they get it with their Nokia phone or whatever. They may not know that that's actually a conduit for transporting data as well as just power. And, I can't blame the user, but it's definitely something to worry about, so be careful.
A lot of people, honestly, I would have not have really considered this as closely. I think this is a very good thing to be demonstrated, and hopefully there'll be a learning process for a lot of folks after this. It's good, very good point.
Yeah, and one of the things that they mentioned at DEF CON was that there was one user which, on their device, I'm not sure if it was a phone or some sort of a tablet kind of device, but whatever it was, they had some sort of setting to disable this data transfer capability. So they had disabled it, plugged it in, and it came right on. And so basically they said, oh, I guess this feature doesn't work here. So just because you have a setting there doesn't mean that you're protected. So, beware of that.
So now here's another angle to this that I just thought about is a black hat could write custom malware, drop it on his phone, go to one of these kiosks, plug in. If they have any kind of auto-run functionality and it mounts as a USB device, you might be able to infect the kiosk just by plugging your phone into it if you were intentionally trying to do that. I'm not saying that people would do that or if it would work either, depending on how that kiosk is designed, but it's an interesting thought.
Right.
I could be wrong about this. I think generally speaking, the kiosks don't have a computer in them. I think this is kind of a special scenario, but they're, you never know. That it could expand into that kind of scenario that we have to be paying attention to.
Yeah, that was one of the points here is you don't know what's behind it.
Yep.
When all you see is the cable or the USB port, you don't necessarily know what's behind it.
Absolutely.
And even that advice as far as shutting the phone off, they say not all phones stay in that state when you plug it in. So be careful with that as well.
Sure. Okay, how about malware network devices, Jim?
Yeah, the last thing that I wanted to talk about today was this post that showed up 2 days ago on SecureList. Which we've talked about it a number of times, and every week when we see Telnet as one of the ports on our internet weather wallboards, we comment that one of the things that they may be looking for is these home routers and DSL modems. But seeing a recurrence of this, it's been going on for a number of years. I think the first one that I'm aware of was Cybot, and that was late 2008, early 2009, something like that we were seeing a lot of it and got a couple of samples of it. We spend so much time talking about securing the computers and lately securing our mobile devices, but the infrastructure devices are just computers too, and they have the ability to get infected as well. And so this isn't anything particularly new, but this story just hit this week, so I thought I'd mention it again.
That's good, Jim. I think that's a reasonable segue into sort of our regular internet weather report here, and that we've been reporting for a few weeks now, and we'll continue to report about some activity that appears to be still perhaps network-infected devices that exist in predominantly Korea, and as you said, Cybot and that class of activity is still active on the internet. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of the activities that we've seen over the last week here. On the top of the list, as we've been reporting, is port 23. That's Telnet. We'll take a little closer look at that. I think last week we introduced a discussion on port 8909 and have since issued alerts associated with that as well. That one we can take a little closer look at what's happening. The red arrow here is pointing at 3389. We'll talk about why I classified that as red in the sense that, I can tell you that what we're seeing is an increase in the number of sources that are doing scanning activity on that port. That happens to be associated with RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, so we're seeing an increase there. We'll want to pay attention to that. We've seen some mild increase in SIP activity. That's the UDP port 5060, and some mild increase in this 1513 activity. We'll take a look at that as well. We've previously associated the port 22 scanning activity with the port 23. It looks like the malware in that case is doing attacks against both those ports. And last but not least, we'll talk a little bit about port 8443. I have a little bit of information to share with you on that. So looking at our next item here, this is, again, looking at port 23 activity, scanning activity on port 23. This is the number of sources that are doing that scanning. And as I said, it's related to the same sort of scanning activity that we're seeing on port 22 as well. As we've been reporting, the level of activity, the number of sources that are scanning is going down. We're reporting on the order of about 12,000 sources specifically from Korea, and that has relaxed a little bit. We're down to on the order of peaking at around 5,000 sources. There are some others that are doing some scanning, but there was a particular event there. It looks like it's being worked through, but however slowly. Another interesting observation here is that over the weekend, around August 12th to August 14th timeframe, it's been highlighted there. There was sort of a lull in the diurnal pattern, the daily pattern of that scanning activity. It appears that perhaps the command and control for that activity had been lost, and so the commands to do the scanning were lost as well. But that command and control has been restored, and so there it is. In this case, the important aspect is we believe that this is a password guessing activity. Make sure that you have good complex passwords if you're forced to expose these to the internet, but the better recommendation is to not expose them at all. On the next item here, we have scanning activity. This is, again, looking at the number of sources that are doing that scanning activity on port 3389. That's remote desktop protocol. Remote desktop protocol is a nice convenience. It allows you to get to the desktop of a Windows application remotely. We've seen some spikes in scanning activity. We had reported this, I think, last week and perhaps maybe even the week before. The little more troubling aspect is that over the last few days here, what we've seen is a gradual and continuing increase in the number of sources that are doing that scanning. That's a very strong indication of sort of botnet recruitment activity that is, as new devices are being exploited, they're being put into the pool of devices, hosts that are helping to recruit additional machines. So, again, same kind of recommendation here. If you have to expose RDP to the internet, make sure that you've got good protections on it, everything's patched, and good passwords. Next item. This is, I just wanted to also give a little bit of a demographic here. I took a look at the most active sources that were doing that scanning activity. So more recently, we've seen on the order of about 1,000 sources, give or take. I think it was about 1,100 sources that were doing the scanning. I took the first 200 of those, and those were actually, they represent only 17.6% of the sources that are doing the scanning, but they actually represent about 71% of the probes that are taking place. So I thought that was sort of an interesting observation, and highlighted on the map here is sort of a hot spot that a lot of these scans are coming. The sources are resident in the Asia-Pacific region. And I'll just sort of make a note that RDP happens to be used rather frequently in some attacks for penetrating enterprises, and so this will be one area certainly to pay attention to. Next item here. This is just what I reported earlier, a mild increase in activity that we're seeing on port 5060 UDP. That's session initiation protocol. It's used for call control for voice over IP. Again, this is something that just to be aware of. It's not a significant increase, but it is, however, an increase. And we have been seeing some increases, generally speaking, in the security area where voice over IP systems are being hacked and used to do fraudulent activities. So you want to pay attention to any case where you have a VoIP-enabled PBX and make sure that you have good protections around that.
We've talked about, we've talked about this SIP scanning activity before. There's some tools out there, one notably SIPVicious, that's very good at not only identifying open SIP gateways, But brute forcing, enumerating the extensions that are available on that SIP PBX or VoIP PBX, and then brute forcing their way into it, or just finding ones that don't have any passwords. So if you have your VoIP PBX exposed to the internet, be careful. Try to prevent that. That's always our suggestion. But if you can, and it needs to be on the internet, at least filter so only certain known endpoints need to be able to talk to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, John. Next item here, this is port 1513 UDP. I don't see anything that is directly security related here. It appears to be P2P activity, but it is an abrupt change in the level of activity that we're seeing. And so I wanted to at least point this out if you have anything that, if you're observing activity on 1513, also point out that it appears that most of the participants in this are associated with consumer activities. It doesn't look like enterprise activity so much. So again, we've had several other ports like this that were reported in the last few weeks. There seem to be a lot of little shifts that are taking place in the port assignments for particular P2P applications or something along those lines, and we're just keeping an eye on it. And the next item here, we have, and this is actually one of the things that I find to be, I'm not going to say troubling, but it's a little bit new on the radar here. We reported last week some spurious scanning activity on port 8443 TCP. We've seen it again. I did a little research into this, and two things have sort of came to the surface. One is that there is an application associated with VMware that uses this port. It's an HTTPS port for basically the web console associated with the management tools for VMware. So something that a cloud service platform might be using. So that's one aspect of it. And perhaps a coincidence, perhaps not. It looked like this scanning activity, and this is probing activity across, scanning across different addresses. It's actually the predominant amount of this is actually originating from a cloud service provider. I'm not going to name the specific one here, but it does sort of raise concern from my point of view that this may be, in fact, at least one cloud device that has been perhaps exploited and being used to probe around looking for others. So if you are using VMware and if you have some remote management capabilities enabled, make sure that's well protected. There was actually one other application that uses that port that I found. It appeared to be related to Symantec tool, so it did have a security relationship as well. So if you're using I think it's the Symantec SEM tool, that would be one to pay attention to.
And that is a port that often gets used as an alternate port for HTTPS, just like 8080 gets used as an alternate for HTTP.
So this is sort of a new twist on things. I just thought I'd summarize some of the scanning activity and to put it into context and what we're seeing in terms of changes. So this graph is showing the last 7 days of activity, and it's actually showing how that activity has changed in terms of the number of sources that are doing the scanning, how that's changed over the last week. So one of the things that's interesting is a few days ago, about 5 days ago now, we saw a big spike in the number of sources that were scanning on port 3389. We saw that in a previous graph, and we see that increasing trend that's taking place. We also see sort of an increasing trend for port 22 TCP activity. And there's sort of an underlying set of activity on port 135. 135 has been a classic target for a very long time. It comes and goes, but that would be mostly looking for machines that have been sort of sitting out there unpatched for a long time. And then on the decreasing side, there's a little less scanning activity on ICMP. That's a ping request. And we're continuing to see, I would say, encouraging decrease in the level of scanning activity on port 445 TCP. That's generally associated with file sharing, Conficker, some versions of Conficker worm were pretty aggressive at scanning on port 445 looking for a specific type of vulnerability. So that's encouraging news. I actually had to clip off the bottom of this graph, but the number of sources that are dropping there is on the order of about 5%, even over the last 5 or 6 weeks or so, which is encouraging news.
So, Brian, this particular chart here, is this an actual count of the scan SIPs, or is this a change in kind of their relative percentage of what we expect?
This is a change in the number of sources that we see scanning relative to our last 5 or 6 weeks or so.
Okay.
Okay. So we've got our average that we've seen, and then this is looking at the difference over the last week. It's a little confusing. This is a little bit experimental, but I thought it would be kind of fun to share this. And I think that pretty much covers it for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us. Just to sort of recap, we had John Hogoboom, Jim Clausing, Dave Gross, and I'm Brian Rexroad. Again, if you have feedback or would like to contact us about new ideas and things that you'd like to hear about, you can contact us at cyberthreat@list.att.com. And we have 3 ways to get to this program. You can go to the AT&T Tech channel. That's techchannel.att.com. There is actually a link up there that identifies the cyber threat report. You can go to iTunes and get the podcast. That's available on audio. Just search for AT&T Cyber Threat Report. And the same with YouTube. You can get it from YouTube and search for the AT&T Cyber Threat Report. Thanks for joining us today, and we look forward to talking with you again.